Going live. Welcome back. It is May 15th, and we are here with This Week in Baseball across Indiana with a couple VIP guests with us. We've got Sam Frick. We call him Super Sam. He covers the Northeast Corner Conference, but the whole really part of the state. You're talking the Northeast Corner Conference, the Northeast state. We're going to get some good summary of the season so far from him. And then we've got Val Tsoutsouris. How'd I do on that, Val?
Great.
That's a Scrabble word right there. That last name. I've never had that problem with a name like Hill. Nobody's ever asked me how do you pronounce that or how's that go. I've never been so lucky. Then of course our regular, the captain, Steve Craw is with us. And Steve, I got to ask you a question here. Look at that beautiful lid I got going on there. Can any of you guys name that lid right there? What about you,
Give
Cap?
up. That's the Clay Colonials. South
That's
Bend
right.
Clay.
Why do you think I got this hat on, Steve?
South Bend Clay just hit the 1,000th victory for their program. Goes back to 1964. They've won more contests in any sport in the city of South Bend, with the exception of maybe South Bend Riley Swimming, which is a long time powerhouse. Jim Reinbold uh, was around back in '64. He won 646 games. He was a founder of the Indiana High School Baseball Coaches Association. They still run the Jim Reinbold Fall Baseball Camp, which his son Joel is a big part of. Joel is the head coach at Clay. His dad passed away in 2017, but what a great guy. But they just won a couple of swept a doubleheader, uh, and they hit the 1,000 mark.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's why I wore this hat, and got to throw this out here too, because Joel Reinbold, just one of the many great high school baseball coaches we have here in Indiana, and that organization he runs also, where he goes down to I think it's Jamaica every year, and
Yeah,
te-
rounding third.
that's right.
They get equipment, give them to kids in Jamaica. He's been down there to give lessons and soak up the sun many times. It also helps out kids locally that are in need of equipment. So they're always looking for help there. If you can donate a bat or a glove or a jersey or what have you, they'll find a place for it.
Absolutely. Hit up Joel Reinbold, head coach of South Bend Clay, and give him some of that equipment because he can put it to use. I mean, it's fun to watch all that stuff he puts on throughout the year. He puts up a lot of the Jamaican pictures all the time. So I love what he's doing up there, South Bend Clay. Just one of those historical programs. You know, you mentioned Jim Reinbold. You think of that name, and that's one of those, I call them the founding fathers of high school baseball in Indiana, really. You've got him. You've got Spider Fields over in Lafayette. You know, you've got Laporte, and of course one of the most historical names, and I just went brain dead on it. Help me out, Steve.
Jim Schreiber.
Schreiber, yes, thank you, Val. That's
Schreiber.
why we had you on the show today, Coach Schreiber up in Laporte, and all over. You've got Coach Jones from down in Evansville. So there's a lot of them. So couldn't be happier for South Bend Clay, and what a lid. Got to talk about it. So hey, let's talk about our guests we have on here today. And once again, Chris is going to get on me. My mouse isn't working. There we go. Sam Frick covers the northeast corner and the northeast eight. Then we've got Val Tsoutsouris, and he covers that whole area surrounding Rochester up there. And I'm going to hold off talking about you guys and let you talk about you guys. Sam, let's go to you first. Let's bring it off mute there, and let's talk about your coverage of around the northeast corner, you call it.
Yeah, the spring season is kind of hitting the climax here of the 21-22 season. I do cover other sports besides baseball and softball, so I'm kind of all the watching what's going on in track and field. Uh, the Northeast State completed their track tournaments Monday nights, and the NECC had their tournaments on Wednesday and Friday. Huntington North boys, sorry, Huntington North girls, Columbus City boys won the NE8s And then the Angola girls cheer basketball boys won the NECC tournaments last week, and that also covers the fact finally have good weather in baseball and softball. So we're finally starting to get some games that actually matter in the NECC because it's still pretty tight in both baseball and softball. But baseball in particular, we'll get to that in a second, is pretty tight right now.
I can't hear right now.
Me neither.
There we go. How about now? That was hard. I told these guys off air before we get started that when you got a host that calls himself Hardy the Hat Guy, that you kind of get what you expect. But I lead the team in airs, Val, so probably won't be the first. Talk to us about the ITCTV Channel 4. I think it is sports you got going on there.
It's RTCTV.
RT.
And it's the R stands for Rochester, and I've lived and worked in Rochester since 2004, and like Sam, I cover a lot more than just softball and baseball. I'm at track meets all the time, girls tennis matches. I walk the golf course during the TRC boys golf tournament at Rosella Ford in Warsaw yesterday. So I cover all 7 of those schools, and I cover all the sports that they play, and I've been doing it for about 18 years now. I've been at RTC for 2 years now, and we host a weekly TV show called Talking Sports with Val that airs every Friday, and I have a website, rtc4sports.com, where my writing appears, and I've even branched out into some play-by-play.
Nice. Well, I'll tell you, Sam knows this. Sam's been on the show with us before, and we really want to promote anybody that's promoting amateur sports. So we love what you're doing, and we know it's it's all about the love of the game and the love of what everybody's the coaches are doing to not just make better athletes but make better men and women, and we promote you guys for what you're doing for that. So let's keep it with you, Val, and let's look at some of the conferences. I think the NECC is one of the biggest conferences in the state. Then we have the Hoosier Plains, and I might be missing a team on here, but Argos is one of the teams that you cover. They're in the Hoosier Plains along with Bethany Christian and Elkhart Christian Academy, and I think there's another in there, but they don't have a baseball team. You can correct me on that if I'm right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if South Bend Career Academy has a baseball team. I don't think Lakeland Christian has a baseball team. So, yeah, I think we only have 3 in this conference.
And looking at that, you've got Argos sitting at 3-1 in the conference, 7-7 overall.
I don't think the Trinity Green Lawn has a baseball team. There's normally 6 in this conference, but those 3 don't have baseball. So we only have 3.
And I think Trinity had a team last year, I believe. Or it might have been in the last 2 or 3 years. I know they've had one because I got their hat. But
South Bend Career Academy has kind of come and gone.
Right.
Yeah. Every year you kind of got to check up on them.
Anything
Argus has really had a nice year. Last year they won 2 games. This year they've already won 7 games. And they had a nice win over a very good Caston team the other day that I was able to see. Coach Joe Kindig is back for a second stint as coach, and he's got 2 of his sons on the team, Dylan Kindig and Jackson Kindig. Dylan's one of his star pitchers, and Jackson is his leadoff man and center fielder. And then he's got a senior catcher in Kurt Johnson, who's really having a nice year as well.
That's good to hear. I think they're they're 1A in the Hoosier Plains, the dynamic conference of the Hoosier Plains. Let's go on and talk about the one that's a little bit bigger, the Hoosier North. And you've got a few teams you cover in this conference. Let's talk about what you see from some of the teams you cover in this conference.
Right, I cover Winnemac, I cover Caston, I cover Pioneer, and I cover Culver Community. The story has been Winnemac leading the conference with an 11-1 record. They're 2-0 against Caston. They already swept the 2-game set from Caston, and they've got a 1-game lead on top of that. Winnemac's got 9 seniors on their team this year. Steve, I guess you saw them play yesterday against Rochester. That was kind of a tough loss. They were leading 7-0.
It was a close game until an 8 spot. I had a crazy 8. I call it crazy 8s because I saw an 8-run inning on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at the games I was at.
Yeah, but Marcus Kay is the coach. He's done a really nice job there. He's got 9 seniors on his team. It's just a loaded senior class with all boys sports. They had 20 seniors on their football team, and they went undefeated during the regular season. So it's a group that's had a lot of success. Guys like Russell Compton and Caleb Seymour and Mitchell Bunnell. Tyler Perry is a veteran catcher, another senior that they have. Dylan Brown is a senior third baseman. So it's a win. It's a Winnipeg team that had high hopes coming into the season, and they've really proven it. They're 11-1, and then you've got Caston at 9-2. And the story there is, Blake Mollenkoff, I believe, is in his 16th season at Caston, and he's never won a conference championship before. And here they are; they're just one game back going into the final week of conference play. Unfortunately for Caston, both of their conference losses came to Winnipeg, but they also swept North Judson. So it's been, a topsy-turvy year in the conference. But, Caston's got 2 games against Triton coming up this week. They travel to Triton on Tuesday, and they host Triton on Thursday. If they can win out and maybe hope that Winnipeg loses one of their last 2, they can maybe either tie for the conference or maybe even win it outright. And then Pioneer, they're 7-5. Josh Hardy, I think is in his second or third year as coach. It's a team, they've gotten some votes at times. They've got a really terrific young sophomore pitcher in Brayden Erickson. He's just got dynamite stuff. And then they've really been able to build up the pitching depth there as the seasons progress with kids like Brenton Gomer and Caleb Sweet. They've got a really good leadoff hitter and second baseman in Caden Couch. So yeah, it's been a really competitive year. Pioneer, they had a huge win over North Judson the other day. They were down 11-7 going into the bottom of the 7th and scored 5 to win at 12-11, but then came back and lost to North Judson the next day. So looks like Pioneer would be trying to play spoiler this week. They travel to Winnipeg, which should be a big game.
Well, isn't that how it goes sometimes? We've talked about that on the show a few times, how, you get a big upset win, and then, do you have enough arms? Because last week across the state, so many teams had so many games that a lot of young kids got a lot of pitching last week, for sure. Let's take a look at that. The other conference that you cover, and that is the Three Rivers. I think you've got, of course, your Rochester Zebras there, and Tippecanoe Valley, the Vikings that you're covering there. And Rochester's been on my radar for a while. They've had quite a year. Tell us a little more about what you're seeing here in this.
We didn't know what to expect a little bit from Rochester coming into this year, because they graduated 5 seniors from a team that won their 2A sectional last year. They graduated, including their top 2 pitchers. I mean, Brock Beeler, he's pitching at Rose Holman these days, and Kyle Reinertz is pitching at Grace College these days. His younger brother, Tanner Reinertz, is a freshman this year, and he's been hitting cleanup most of the year, and he's been terrific, and he's kind of filled one of those holes in the pitching staff. And then, Aaron Huffman was a kid who came on late last year. He's pitched pretty well. They've got a terrific shortstop in Tarek McLaughlin. Tarek has pitched a couple times this year. I think they're trying to take it easy with his arm, but he's another talented pitcher and so they've really been able to fill the holes that they had through the kids that they lost. I mean, Grant McCarter, Quinn Stasiak, and Kane Lutz were also key parts of that team. So far this year, they were 10-0. Now they're 13-5, so only 3-5 in their last 8 games. But they've lost to some good teams during that time, including Wabash, who's 7-0 and reigning atop the conference right now. Of course, Rochester drew Wabash for the first round of the sectional, so those teams will be meeting again coming up, I think, on May 25th. So the first matchup went to Wabash back in their regular season meeting at Rochester about a week ago, but there will be a rematch. But yeah, Rochester's had a fine year. They've really played well, and the newcomers have really filled in and have really contributed.
Well, if I recall, they're one of the teams there that had a really rough week as far as schedule strength over the last couple weeks. I mean, I know in putting together my top matchups of the week, I think I mentioned Rochester in like 3 of them. Of course, one of them was the Wabash game, and I can't remember the other 2 they played. But looking at that Three Rivers Conference, that's another historically good conference. If you think of baseball as Hoosier hysteria, you throw in Wabash there and Rochester. I mean, there's a lot of history in this conference.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at Manchester. Jack Rupley has won a state championship before. North Miami won a sectional as recently as 2019. Northfield has a tremendous baseball tradition. Peru has a terrific baseball tradition. Valley, that's the other team I cover. They've only played 12 games. They've just seemingly run in bad weather all throughout the season. They've had trouble just getting in some games. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we're nearing the 1-year anniversary of the tragic passing of Brendan Stump. And I think that's they put a memorial up near the ballpark in his honor, but that just hit that program so hard, and we're still thinking of them and Coach Jared Littlejohn, 1 year later, and of all they've had to endure.
Absolutely. That's tough when that hits the high school environment for sure. Coach, Val, I appreciate that's some good input. It's when luckily I've got Steve Craw on the show because he covers. He knows names and helps me out whenever I can't remember them and everything like that. But having you guys on is valuable because it's with almost 400 teams in Indiana, and all the games that they have per the week. It's hard to cover the whole state. So bringing in experts like yourself is perfect. And let's bring it over to Super Sam here, and let's talk about some of those schools up in the northeast corner. We're talking about the Northeast 8 and the NECC. Now, you mentioned there was one, and I couldn't recall. Which one was it? One of these teams in the Northeast 8, Sam, is new this year. Is that correct?
No, none of these teams are new.
Well, I meant, did Leo...
They've been around for about 7 years. Leo joined the same time as the league joined.
Okay.
When the league was formed in 2015, Leo and Huntington North came in. Huntington North came in from the NCC. Leo came in from the ACAC, which they filled for Homestead and Carroll.
The looking at this Northeast 8 is another one that you look. Norwell made a deep run last year. Coach Bice at DeKalb is doing some good things, and I believe this is his first year. Maybe talk to us a little bit about the Northeast 8 there, Super Sam.
It's a very balanced conference. Top to bottom, all these teams can compete with anybody in the Northeast State. The Cal Barons are kind of a weird team this year. They actually clinched their conference last week because Columbia City, who's down in 7th place in the Northeast State, they beat Leo 8-3, and that clinched the Cal a share of the Northeast State. But the Cal lost to Belmont 8-5, and so they have not clinched outright yet. The Barons score a lot of runs. They're a home run hitting team. They got guys like Parker Smith, Tegan Irk, Donnie Wiley. They're very good offensive hitters. They got some decent defensive players, and they have a couple young pitchers. They have the Jordan kid on there, Eli Emke. Emke's a name you probably heard a lot at DeKalb. They had one that was committed to play college baseball, I think at St. Francis. I could be wrong about that. But DeKalb is historically known as a very good baseball team, but they play in a hard conference. They play in a hard sectional. In fact, one of their wins in their conference was against New Haven, and New Haven was a 12-10 game. And so to tell you how deep the conference is, that's how difficult it is. Norwell has had some tough games as well. They lost to Leo. They blew a 2-run lead to lose, I think, 6-5. They lost 8-1 to DeKalb, and those are their only conference losses. Norwell got a very good pitching-oriented roster, more of a defensive team this year. The guys like Layton Bailey have kind of led the way for Norwell, and a very young team. No seniors on the team, and they have a freshman named Drew Graft, Luke Graft's little brother, and he's a very good player for the Norwell Knights. And so you have that going on. Belmont's got got some nice arms on that team down in Decatur. They have a decent sectional, but it's a tough sectional with Norwell and state-ranked Heritage in that sectional. Huntington North is one of those teams that's been a little hot and cold right now. They got some decent arms as well, some nice young players on the team, but offensively they're kind of struggling a little bit right now, and they play a very tough schedule early in the season. So the record kind of shows how tough their schedule is early in the season. East Noble has a nice team. Brayden Reisdorf and Noel Perkins leading the way. Reisdorf, in case you haven't noticed, is committed to IU. And so East Noble has some deep arms, but they struggle to score. And that's really the issue with the East Noble Knights. Leo has just recently dropped in the conference standings. They were right there with DeKalb until last week. And after winning that game against Huntington North at Parkview Field, dropped a couple L's to Columbia City and Belmont. And so they have dropped tremendously in that last week alone. It'll be interesting to see how DeKalb handles this coming week, as they still have to play the Leo Lions to clinch the conference outright.
Well, and a couple takeaways I have of this conference. This is another. Yeah, DeKalb, you said it. They have a great history, but also if you look at that total wins, that column all the way in the right, you've got 6 teams, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that have a winning record. And if you look at it, they're three. It's a dominated 3A, 4A conference. So the one thing I look at is, you look at Leo sitting in a 3A team and Belmont sitting at a 3A team. Their schedule strength makes them an intriguing come tourney time, because their schedule strength is so strong that they may come in there with 8, 9, 10 losses, but they're going to be a tough matchup just because of their schedule strength. And some big name coaches in here too. A lot of coaches I have respect for. Dave Bischoff. Coach Desmond's there at East Noble. Coach Rogers at Leo. Coach Bell at Columbia City. The list goes on and on, with some good coaches there in the Northeast 8. Let's go to the NECC. That's the Northeast Corner Conference. I love this conference. It's a big conference, but look at that tight race right there. You mentioned that at the beginning. I even hesitate to ask you to try to break this down, because this is a tough conference for sure, and a tight race this year.
Yeah. Going into the season, I projected Fremont to win the NECC, and I'll tell you exactly why. The Fremont Eagles came into the season with 10 seniors. This is their last go around, basically to contend for the NECC and go far in the playoffs. And I just thought with the arms they have on that team, the amount of experience on that roster, led by Coach Justin Bach. That's a historically great program, small school up in Steuben County. And I just love that roster, just how the way they configure the roster. Catcher Nick Miller has hit bombs late for Fremont, and he's kind of their backbone of the defense for Fremont. They also have some young kids there, like the Guthrie kid. They have a Folk kid that's pretty good at Fremont. So they got a nice roster in general. Now, they lost to Westview earlier this season 4-0. And I told you going into the season, Westview is going to be better than last year. Westview's defense has picked up this year, and they have a kid by the name of Matt Engel, a freshman at Westview. He is sensational for the Westview Warriors, and he has brought some stability in that roster, in that rotation. And you have the Kaufman kid, you got the Wired kid, you got the Titus kid, and they got just a nice all-around roster offensively for the Westview Warriors. It just comes down to how well they play defensively. That seems to be their issue at times. Now, Westview lost to Garrett 8-5, and that was a game that had 9 errors, I believe, in that first conference game against Garrett. Garrett is 7-1. They have a great roster in terms of their rotation behind Cale Bodman, Ram Kellum, a Ball State commit. They have Luke Holcomb, who's only a sophomore. Just great pitching all around. Garrett's one of those teams that doesn't score a lot of runs, but they can win those 1-0, 2-1 games. And that's why their sectional is very interesting, because there's a lot of good teams there, but Garrett's pitching keeps them in these ball games. And they're battle tested for a school like Garrett that's a little bit smaller than some of these other schools. And then you have Eastside, the state finalists in 2A, and they lost to Fremont. They had a 5-3 lead going into the 7th inning, and they ended up losing 7-5 to Fremont. And that was at Eastside, and that's why Fremont is in first place right now, and that's why you see Eastside down in 4th place. But their younger team, it seems like they're starting to get things figured out. It's Aaron Willard. He always finds a way to get the most out of his kids. And he got his son Owen, who's going to Purdue Fort Wayne next year. He's been fantastic once again. And Carson Jacobs is pretty good. So it's a very balanced roster all around. The thing that I wonder is how Eastside's going to manage their rotation, because they got to play 3 conference games next week. Central Noble Tuesday, Westview Thursday, and Garrett Friday. And that's going to decide the NECC because of that predicament there. Fremont's already played Westview. They beat Garrett 5-0. They play East and they beat them 5. And so Fremont's going to be playing more of the weaker teams down the stretch, battle each other, and then we'll see how the conference is shared or won outright. So it will be a very interesting conference to look at over the next week or so.
Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Is you look at this tight race right here with 4 teams sitting at 4-1, Fairfield at 6-2, and looking at those top 3 right there. When people look at this conference at the start of the year, a lot of the talk was on Eastside because of what they did last year. A lot of the talk was on Fairfield because Alec Hirschberger, but that's why Garrett and Westview, just the turnaround they had was just amazing. And speaking of matchups, Another reason why I wanted to have you on here as we move into talking about some of the individual performances of the week. Let's talk about this one. This, in my book, was going into it was the pitching matchup of the week right here. You had Aaron Willard, who you mentioned, the Purdue Fort Wayne guy. He pitched in the state finals last year, going up against, I believe, currently still uncommitted junior Alec Hirschberger of Fairfield. And I don't know if any of you guys saw this game, but man, alive, on paper, it was 14 strikeouts by Aaron Willard versus 11, or Owen, sorry. I think his dad probably couldn't get. Yeah, he probably couldn't get 7 innings anymore. But and Alec Hirschberger had 11. But defense wins the game. Sam, were you at this game, or Steve? And tell me what
I was at this game. Yeah, this was a tight game until Eastside blew it open at the end of the game. It was really that way, and they ran out of pitching, knowing that they have to. There's more games to be played. They kind of hit the limits. They were both. I think that Hirschberger was at 106 pitches, and Willard was close, a little under 100. But they wanted to save his bullets for a little later in the week.
And keep in mind, Willard gave up 2 earned runs even in that game against Fairfield. So it was still, I mean, because
I think
when
he's
Willard
given up.
came out,
I think he'd given up 6 earned runs to that up to that point. So
yeah, into that season. And so, Aaron, I think Steve, you probably interviewed Aaron about this, but he was expecting this to be another 1-0 game, and this was one of those matchups where you just like
yeah,
pitching's going to come down. It's going to come
they
down to
they
which
had
pitcher
a
can.
1-0 game right on that same field a year ago, and it looked like it was heading that way until it wasn't or late in the game. But
And it just seems like some of the same themes from the last time they met kind of occurred again this time, except this time Fairfield's pitching depth was tested by this experienced East Side lineup. And the thing, everybody talks about Owen Willard as this great pitcher. People forget how good of a hitter Owen Willard is too. He hits the ball extremely well. He's an RBI machine. He hits for average. He's fast. He's incredibly athletic, 3-sport athlete. So it's not. I mean, he's not just a one-trick pony with
he
with
was
Owen
our
Willard.
player of the week a couple of weeks ago when he had racked up a lot of strikeouts and hit for the cycle in the same game. I mean,
Perfect game and a cycle at Parkview Field.
and he's a leadoff hitter, so he kind of starts fires for him. He does all kinds of stuff.
And having a leadoff hitter like Owen Willard, I mean, that's probably the most important part about this snap is, it's a relatively younger team than the one from last year. They lost, I think, 8 kids at graduation last year. And so this, people talk about, this is a reigning state champion. It's relatively a retooled roster compared to 2021. But because you have Owen Willard, you still have Carson Jacobs. It feels like they're still in it. And that's part of the reason why Eastside was in that talk, is because you got Owen Willard, you got Carson Jacobs, you have stability in that rotation. It was just a matter of, can they get the key hits? Can they get those runs when they need to? And can they clean up their game? Because early on in the season, just looking at the numbers, it looked like the Blazers were having some trouble, keeping a clean defensive game behind the pitching. And that's where some of those losses came early this season against Leo, Fremont, and even they lost to Cal too. And so, it's a team that's kind of getting hot at the right time. It's just going to be interesting to see how this team translates into the postseason. I think they'll be able to get through the sectional. How? Because two. I don't know if we're going to talk about sectionals today, but 2A35 is kind of a wild card. I have no idea what's going to happen there. So, and Fairfield's in that sectional, 2A35. Eastside's in 36. So we'll see what happens if these two teams meet again in regionals.
Yeah, they're in the.
How many
they're in the,
three-sport
they're
athletes
in the
does
two
each have?
sections next to each other, so there could
Sorry.
they would play each other. They could run into each other again.
How many three-sport athletes does Eastside have? They've had just a tremendous year in all boys sports, it seems like.
Oh, I would say I can name probably at least 4 or 5 that are definitely multi-sport athletes. I think more than half of the rosters probably played at least one sport at Eastside. Owen Willard, I know, has played 3 sports. Carson Jacobs, I know, has played another sport. He played football. He was on a semi-state football team. I think he played on the defensive end
Mm-hmm.
for the Blazers. Yeah, they had a football team that went all the way to semi-state. Boys basketball went 25-2. Girls basketball won their first sectional in 6 years. Their softball team was undefeated until last Friday. They lost to Leo like 8-0 to Leo in softball, and so Leo and Eastside softball is under a first-year head coach. So yeah, it's been an amazing. That's probably the best year Eastside ever had all around. And Eastside has been a very consistent program since they came into the conference in 1980, which ironically Fairfield came to the NECC in 1980 from what was formerly known as the Northern State Conference. Fun fact.
That's a good point, Val, because we've brought that up in the past. You look at some of the teams, like down in the South. I think Gibson Southern is having a good baseball season this year, and we know how good they were in football this year. Looking at some of the teams you cover, talk about some of those multi-sport athletes, not just from an individual standpoint, maybe from a team, because we do see a pattern like that. When a team has a good football season, a team has a good basketball season, it ends up they're at least pretty darn competitive in the baseball season because they've got a group of athletes that have stayed together. Tell us about some of those you see in the teams you cover.
Well, the one that I have my eye on is the Carroll Cougars, who are ranked number 1 in Class 2A right now in baseball, and they've had a phenomenal year. They won a boys soccer sectional back in the fall. They won a football sectional back in the fall, and their boys basketball team made it all the way to the semi-state. And you look at Carroll's, their ace pitcher is Will Eldridge, and he was an outstanding basketball player as well. And then, so that they've had it. That's the one that comes to mind. And we've definitely seen it at, some of the schools that I cover, especially at Rochester and at Caston. Got a lot of good basketball players in our area who then play, turn around and play baseball during the spring. And, it's been a great year to cover, and it makes my life fun.
Let's look at one more pitching matchup, and then I want to get you guys some of your perspectives on some of the top performances of the week. I thought that Owen Willard versus Alec Hirschberger was going to be the pitching matchup, and it certainly lived up to its bidding. But look at this one. You've got Dalton Wasson. I'm probably Wasson. I'm probably butchering that, Dalton. I apologize. And Braxton Betancourt of Bluffton, 17 Ks and 16 Ks respectively. Neither one was a no-hitter, ironically, but this matchup right here, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find a better pitching matchup this year. I've not seen one, and I've talked to some people. These guys, these aren't accidents. These guys have been pitching well all year. So now, if they're not on your radar, they need to be. So some good performances right there of what is probably the top pitching matchup rather of the year. What I want to talk about real quick, and I want to get you guys update on, is this week there were a lot of upsets. Let me give you some totals here. And when I say upset, I want to break it down into 3 different categories. One is what I would consider maybe a true upset. That is, a team is high ranked and they're playing a team that is not ranked in the same class, maybe in the same conference. It's a game they otherwise, on paper anyway, they should have won. And I'll get to why I kind of bring that up here in a second. The not upsets were if you have 2 ranked teams or, a ranked team loses to a higher class team that's possibly also ranked as well. Like you've got a 1A team that's ranked number 3 and they're going up against a 4A team that's ranked number 2. I don't consider that an upset. I don't think anybody would argue with me on that. Then you've got what I call the coin toss games. If you have 2 teams that are equally ranked or right around there in the same, or there's some other special conditions, like this is a big rivalry matchup within the same conference, things like that. It's just a coin toss.
Ask you about.
Well, let me show you. The games that I call the upsets, and you tell me if you think these are actual upsets. Monday we had Linton Stockton, who ended up winning the Southwest Indiana Athletic Conference. but their record overall is about 500. They're just 7-0 in their conference, but they beat 2A number 9 Eastern Green. Then you had 1A number 9 North Davies over 1A number 5 Shakamack. But then some of the big ones, you start to come in, you see them Tuesday. You had 4A Carmel. Carmel's an enigma to me. We could talk about them for a while, but they had a big win over 4A number 1 Center Grove. And then 2A 10-8 Hagerstown beat 2A number 6 Centerville. Centerville had a tough week because then you look Thursday, they lost again to LaPel. And, is that an upset? Is it not? Those two teams know each other. Kind of a big one up near you, Steve, was South Bend St. Joe over 3A number 10 Glenn, that was Glenn, only their second loss of the season. Probably one of the biggest upsets of the week in my mind, and with all due respect to Coach Jennings, because I'm sure he would call it an upset also, was in the 3A up there in the region, was 10-10 Griffith beat 4A number 8 Lake Central, who was only 17-3 at the time. I did get a little bit of chance to talk to them, and a lot of errors, and Griffith started out hot. But then just fell apart. There's another one there on Friday that Manchester, and maybe you can help me out on this, Val. Manchester beat who did Manchester beat on Friday that I called an upset? And maybe you might think it's not an upset. Heritage. Yeah, they beat Heritage. Of course, Manchester's in the Three Rivers Conference, so 4-3 in the Three Rivers, and then Heritage.
Manchester's got a terrific pitcher. Manchester's got a terrific pitcher, Martinowitz. When he's on his game, they're a different team. They are not a 6-13 team when he's pitching. He's on his game.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring that up to you, because Heritage, the team they beat, Heritage. Everybody knows how good they're doing this year, but that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. These teams had so many games this week. Do they have enough arms? But then you have a team like this. You have a team like Manchester. They've got one stud ace right there, and they can take on anybody with that one ace. So is that an upset? On any given day, it's not. On paper it might be. Then, of course, you had Lafayette Central Catholic, who's a 1A team ranked number 3, gave Western, who's a 3A number 2, only their second loss of the season. That's another one. Is it an upset? Those are two highly ranked teams right there. The other two that I have that I think, Val, you might be able to talk about, one of them there is, 3A 16-5 Gibson Southern. That's a team we talked about that, they had a good football team that translates into, good set of athletes that are carrying it over into the baseball season, but they're only a 3A team, and they took on 4A number 3 Evansville North and beat them. I would consider that an upset, even though these two teams know each other,
I think that was a slugfest too, because it was a 9-8 game.
Yeah. Well, and they're not in the same conference. Yeah, the Gibson Southern's in the Southern Indiana Conference and sitting at 7-2, and of course Evansville North's in the pocket and they're 7-4 in the pocket. So good matchup there. But this New Haven, who's 5-13, beating 1A number 6 Union City. That's another big upset right there. New Haven is in the Northeast 8, and they're sitting at 1-5, and Union City is in the Tri-Eastern at 4-3 and 13-4 overall. So I think that was another big upset. What's this come down to, the summary? I think a couple things, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong. But number one, I think in general high school games, rankings, especially coaches will tell you they don't even want the kids seeing the rankings. They're for people like us that want something to talk about. But with so many arms, and so many games, teams needing arms, we've got 1 week left in the season. So, looking at the teams you guys cover, Sam and Val and Steve, I'll just open up, Steve, to you for all over the state. One question I want to ask you before we look at individual performances to wrap up the show for the day is, what are some of the teams that maybe aren't on people's radar? They're underranked. Val, you mentioned Manchester. You put this kid on the mound any given day, and they've got a chance. What are some of the teams, maybe it's Manchester, that need to be on people's radar that might not be? And maybe, Val, I can maybe start with you from some of the teams that you cover.
one team in the TRC that I think is really interesting and could have a lot of potential is North Miami. With Shannon Floor as their head coach. This is a team that's they're a 1A school and mostly a 2A and 3A conference. So they play a lot of bigger schools. When they go into the 1A state tournament, I think they'll be well prepared. North Miami drew Pioneer in the first game at Caston in that sectional 52. I think it's gonna be a really interesting game to see. Pioneer. Erickson is their star pitcher. I imagine he'll be on the hill in that game, but against a pretty good North Miami lineup that's pretty solid up and down. That's a game I'm going to be looking at. And then, as I mentioned, that Rochester, Rochester hasn't been ranked all year, but they are 13-5. How will they do against Wabash? Again, they lost to Wabash just last week, but they'll get a rematch in the sectional, and whoever wins that could wind up having to play those top-ranked Carroll Cougars in the sectional semifinals. So that is a game I'm really curious about. And I'm also curious about Class 3A, Sectional 21. That's a sectional that Tippecanoe Valley's in. Jimtown is will be at home in that sectional, and they have a winning record. But after that, I really don't know who could come up and get them. So it's going to be pretty competitive in that sectional. I guess Jimtown's the favorite, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Who else might be able to win? I guess maybe Sam, you know some of those teams better than I do, like West Noble and Lakeland and Wawasee.
I'll just kind of add to that. Lakeland's a really interesting team. They're very, very young team, a lot of young kids. But if there's something with Lakeland, keep an eye on. They have a freshman that I think he's going to be quite special for Lakeland in general. His name's Carson Mickham. He was a nice football player for them this past season, but Carson Mickham can pitch. He has had some decent games against some quality teams. Eastside beat Lakeland, I think it was 8-0, but I think it was 6 or 7 8 runs in the 7th inning came in that 7th inning. It was like a 1 or 2 run game going into the 7th inning. And Eastside kind of blew it wide, just kind of blew it off the radar after that. Carson Mickham can dominate games. It's just with him being a freshman on a team that's very inexperienced and is rebuilding the last couple of years, I'm not sure how well Lakeland's going to do in a section like this. But if they can if Carson Mickham can get hot in sectionals, maybe they can hang around a little bit. They've had some gritty performances there. Now, West Noble got hot early in this season, but West Noble struggled to score runs, and that's something that really concerned me going into sectionals. If there's 2 teams to never rule out in this sectional, never rule out Northwood and Wawasee. I know they're down this year. Yeah, normally they're really, really good. But Northwood and Wawasee are always 2 teams. When I always look at them and say, never, ever truly overlook them because they always seem to play their best at the right time. So
I saw those 2 teams play each other last week, and you're right. Neither one of them has a great record this year, and they're hot and cold. You'll look at some of their scores, and one stretch they'll score 3 runs in 3 games and lose, and next thing you know they're scoring 12 runs against a good team. So they could be laying in the weeds too.
Mm-hmm. And I'll kind of go ahead and just add with my coverage too. For teams in my area that you should keep an eye on. In the NECC, I don't think there's going to be too many sleepers to really look at, but I would say if there's one to definitely keep an eye on, is probably going to be Central Noble. Central Noble plays in a sectional where I don't know if there's a true favorite in that section. Yeah, it could be Fairfield. Yeah, it could be Westview, but Fairfield has had some tight games against teams you would not expect to have tight games. Fairfield's one of those teams that they can be hot and cold offensively. They got some decent talent. They're a good pitching team, but Fairfield made some mistakes sometimes that I'm not sure if I would say Fairfield's a true favorite. And Westview's a team that can get hot and cold. At times they can beat great teams, and they can lose to teams that are or struggle against teams that they're kind of below their par, if you would. And so Central Noble's a team that's kind of there, but they got some decent talent. They got Will Hoover that can pitch. Or Jackson Hoover can pitch. Will Hoover can hit some homers. Jackson Copus can hit some bombs. They're a young team. They make a lot of mistakes, but Central Noble's always hanging around. That would be one team to keep an eye on. They are also the team that won the sectional last year. So definitely keep an eye on 2A35 in the NECC. One last thing with the NEA. I mentioned Columbia City earlier. They're 12-7 this year. This is their best season in, I believe, 6 years. About 6 or 7 years. And they've had some down years under Coach Bell, but I think he's got his kid that's playing on the rotation for Columbia City. Chris Bartle's been pitching well for Columbia City. They got a kid by the name of Brady Schroeder. And in his last game, he had 8 RBIs and 2 home runs. He had a walk-off grand slam against Whitco. Columbia City, they have a hard sectional, and it's going to make it hard for them to win the sectional because of Homestead and Huntington North and Southside in particular as well. But Columbia City is a team that I think in the near future, they're going to be climbing up that Northeast 8 conference as a whole. And never Leo. Leo is in a sectional where you have Bishop Lewis, you have Garrett's, you have Bishop Dwayner, you have Concordia, and then you have Garrett, a team that can play through 1-run games, 2-run games, these tight games, but never ever rule out Leo. They won their conference last year. They went to I think they won regionals, or no, they went to regionals. I'm not 100% sure about that, but Leo still has some good players. They got the Brubaker kid that's pretty good. They got the Massing kid. They got Gunnar Stuckey they got some bats. The Leo Lions, they are a little bit streaky, and they've had some losses lately that you would think on paper are a little bit questionable, but it's Leo, and Leo's still a talented team. It's just a matter of, can they put it all together, play a clean game, and give the pitcher some support? You got a chance. And that section that Leo's in, it's going to be a very pitcher-heavy sectional. It's going to be a sectional that really could go either way. And so, if there's some last words I would say is, the Northeast State's a deep conference. Don't ever disrespect any of these teams in this conference this year, because they can beat anybody on any given night. And a team like Belmont can beat Heritage because they got the arms and they got the bats and experience to hang around. Norwell, because they're so young and so talented, they got the experience, but also the youth to still make that run. And so that would be interesting as well. DeKalb is one that could win the sectional, but they could lose in the first round because they got a team like East Noble that they have to draw in the first round. And if you know anything between DeKalb and East Noble, they always play better than the records show. Never, ever rule out that first round game. You're going to have DeKalb's number 1 pitcher against Brayden Reisdorf. And I'm just going to say this right now. DeKalb better score runs. They better get after Reisdorf early, or they better have a clean game, because it's going to be a rough first game for the Cal Barons in a sectional that favors Carroll and Snyder. It'll be interesting to see how DeKalb handles that.
Brayden Reisdorf was on this program saying, we asked him who his biggest rival was. He didn't hesitate. DeKalb.
Oh, 100%. My parents went to East Noble. They would tell you the same thing.
That's a good segue as we talk about some of the top performances of the week. But you mentioned a couple teams here real quick that I absolutely love. One of them, and here's why I love them, Leo. You got to love Leo. Look at that lid right there. Then, of course, Columbia City. I mean, look at those lids. I mean, I'm Hardy the Hat Guy, so my show, I can throw up some hats real quick. But you also mentioned Brayden Reisdorf, and yeah, he had a great week. In one game, he had 14 Ks, 2.33 per inning in 6 innings pitched right there. Some great performances across the board. It's, a lot of the pitching performances you see are, 1, 2, and 3A. Sometimes teams are dominant anyway, but got to throw out the Fishers right there. Joey Wilmoth with 15 strikeouts over 2 games, 6 innings total, 2.5 strikeouts per innings pitched right there. But look at Bradley Farrell for South Central, the Union Mills variety there, with in 2 games, 4.2 innings pitched, only 12 strikeouts. So all the outs except one person were strikeouts for him there in South Central. Then Delta, Nick Crabtree had 14 Ks over 5 innings this week. So great performances across the board from the pitching. Anybody I'm missing here on pitching performances that you guys saw this week before we talk about the hitters?
I think so.
Can't think of any off the top of my head.
Let's look at one page of hitters right here. And I know this is a lot of data for one page, but I wanted to get a lot so we could highlight the next page, and you'll see here in a second why. But some good performances. Fremont, you mentioned, Sam, Nicholas Miller had 3 home runs this week. Oscar Pegg from Shakamak had 3 home runs this week. Look at the RBIs right there. One of the best names in baseball, Long Chase from Delphi, had 12 ribbies this week.
Chase Long.
Chase Long, right? I forgot to put the comma in there. Chase Long.
His dad's the head coach.
Right. I forgot to put the comma in there on some of these because I'm copying and pasting. But good week, going 7 for 11. 12 ribbies, 2 doubles, a triple, and a home run. You mentioned Eastbrook there, not Eastside, but Eastbrook had a couple guys, Cooper Craw and Luke Shearer. Matter of fact, Luke started out so hot. I thought he was going to be the player of the week there early on. Luke Shearer from Eastbrook ended up the week going 8 for 13, and his teammate there, Cooper Craw, went 8 for 15. 5 ribbies and 2 ribbies accordingly. Good week. We could go top to bottom on this. Andrew Wiggins, got to mention him. Heritage Christian. He had 3 runs. He was 4 for 4, 3 runs, and it was a triple and 2 home runs in one game. So pretty good performance by him. But let's go to this last page right here, because here's some ones I really want to highlight as we kind of wrap up the show. 3 performances right here that these are just like video game performances. I mean, this is just like, when you pick Bo Jackson on the video game, you get stats like this. Going top to bottom there. Eastern Hancock, Wyatt Sutton, 5 games were spanning here, went 14 for 20 with 10 runs. Even Hardy the Hat Guy can do that math. That's 2 runs per game, 13 ribbies, 7 doubles, and a triple. Going up from there, Southwood, Mo Lloyd, look at this. Over 5 games, 9 for 15, 9 runs, 20 RBIs, a double, and 7 home runs this week for Mo Lloyd out of Southwood. There's another guy that just got entered on some people's radar.
Yeah, I've seen Mo play. He is some kind of left-handed hitter. And not only that, but as a catcher, he can control the other team's running game almost single-handedly. He's got a great arm behind the plate.
I think we're not done hearing about him, with only 1 week to go, and that's kind of a hint there.
And he's only a junior.
Yes, that's right. And he hit 600 this week, but I think he's hitting, if I'm right, I think he's hitting right around 500, a little bit higher for the season. But then the week that Nick Wiley had at Mooresville, Mooresville is just tearing it up this year, currently ranked number 2. In 4 games, he went 9 for 12, 8 runs, 15 ribbies, 5 doubles, and 3 home runs. Am I missing anybody right there for as we think about nominating the Baseball Across Indiana Player of the Week? Who you giving it to, Val and Sam? You don't know who we've got as the winner yet. Steve does. Who you giving the Player of the Week to as you look at some of these stats as we go back here? This is the hard part. This is what we got to do is how do you pick a Player of the Week from these guys?
7 homers and 20 RBIs in 5 games. I think I'm giving it to that guy.
More Lloyd.
More Lloyd?
More for Mo.
Well, let's call it a consensus right here. Congratulations to Mo Lloyd of Southwood. Of course, these young kids flocking the hair there. Can we? I don't think any of us could get away with that, could we? I don't think.
I'm not able.
Yeah, and gray doesn't look that good when it's that long for me right there. So, Mo Lloyd with 20 ribbies and 7 home runs for the left-handed junior. What a week. Guys, as we wrap things up, first of all, Val and Sam, I really appreciate it. Tell us where we can find you and tell us about what you've got going on here. Who's on your radar as you're watching baseball over the next couple weeks? And Val, let's bring it to you.
You can read my writing at RTC4. That's the number RTC, the number 4 sports.com. That's where I do all my writing. I'm also host a weekly talk show with my partner Steve Stricker. It's called Talking Sports with Val. It airs every Friday on RTCTV 4 or on the IHSA Champions Network if you want to watch it there. And I also do. I don't think I'm doing any play-by-play this week of any games, but yeah, I've been doing a lot of that this year as well. We do softball and baseball games throughout our area.
Well, we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Marty.
Well, you cover a big area there in northern Indiana, and I'll tell you what, keep us on your radar. Comes regional time and semi-state time, we're going to be reaching out to you because we know you know that part of the state as good as anybody. And speaking of knowing that part of the state, Sam, up there in the corner, I always say that we try to cover baseball from the corner to the pocket and everything in between, but nobody covers it in the pocket or the northeast corner like you do. We really appreciate you coming on. What's on your agenda this week? How do we find you, and who's on your radar?
All right. I do have a Facebook page called Around the Northeast Corner. My Twitter page is @SamTheManFrick. That's how I kind of share my content on there. But the blog is Around the Northeast Corner. Just find the Facebook page. There will be a link there. And I use WordPress, so once you get there, it's pretty easy to find. I use that page a lot, so there's that. For this week, we're going to be keeping an eye on the rest of the conference races. The NE8 softball race is pretty much over. Leo clinched their conference when they beat Columbia City 4-1. So that conference is pretty much done in terms of figuring out who's going to win the conference. We still got to worry about if DeKalb wins the NE8 outright. We're going to figure out what's going to happen with the NECC for baseball. NECC softball is still a little bit interesting because Eastside and Westview are still undefeated in conference, though Westview's played a lot fewer games. Westview's only played about 12 games this year because of rainouts and all that. So, Westview and Eastside still have to play each other in conference. They play each other in the conference tournament. East beat them at Westview the conference tournament on their way to dominating the ECC tournament. So it'd be interesting how Ansel of Westview gets her vengeance against this mighty, mighty good Eastside team. You thought the baseball team was good. Look down Loretta when you get to the softball team. They got some sluggers on that team. That team's going to be a force to be reckoned with come postseason time. If they can get out of their sectional, they're going to be a two-way threat. That Coach Kitchen has a great team.
Well, Sam, we always appreciate your input. Like I said, not only do we appreciate it, we know all the coaches up there in the northeast corner always appreciate your input. And Steve, one of the good things about having these guys on is you don't have to hear me talk so much. This is kind of a nice pleasure for you as well as our guests, I'm sure. But Steve, a lot of stories we could have covered this week. I mean, there was a lot going on even outside of the high school scene. We're talking about there was a MLB debut as well as a signing. Give us some of the stories that we didn't cover this week.
Yeah, real quickly, Tanner Gaff, who went to Whitco High School and he pitched at St. Francis, and this year he was a pitching coach. But while he was the pitching coach, he was working on getting better. He went down to North Carolina, I believe, and worked on his craft. Well, he signed with the Minnesota Twins, and he's joining them as we speak. And I've arranged I'm going to speak with him this week and learn more about it. So that's a pretty cool thing.
Well, as we wrap things up, just a couple more real quick. We have to mention as Steve falls off the table there again for the today. Steve, we're gonna.
My setup's gotta need some more.
Send you some ibuprofen there. The Lawrence North, or who? No, here it is. Eastern of Greentown. Owen Taylor had a no-hitter versus Clinton Central. 8 strikeouts and 6 innings pitched. I just got to mention a few of these things we didn't have real quick. Speaking of no-hitters, Western, who who's rolling, they had a combined no-hitter versus Rossville. Evan Stout had 4 innings pitched, 2 Ks, 2 base on balls, and Deaglin Pleak finished it out with 1 inning and 2 strikeouts. Got to give a shout out to Castillo Thomas of Goshen, who just broke their school stolen base.
Castillo.
Yes, Castillo, who just broke their school's stolen base record. Of course, Cameron Decker, who lit it up at the beginning of the year, he's back on fire. He hit his 10th and 11th home run this week. Duggar Union, I got to give a shout out to Jesse Martin for giving me this nugget here. Brennan Martin at the plate with 7 and 12 on the mound. He had 20 Ks in 11 innings pitched. Culver Military Academy won their own invitational this week. And Columbus, where's that? There was one more I had to mention. The Fairfield, or one more. I got to mention this guy because I told him I was going to mention it. Where's it at? Well, we'll have to mention it maybe on next week's show. So, folks, I appreciate it. That's already that guy trying to squeeze everybody in. We can make this show 5 hours a week. Guys, I appreciate it. Sam and Val, thanks again for joining us. I will make sure when we put the recording on the web here, that we get you guys listed and how to find you. Folks, have a good week. We got one more week of baseball before it gets real with sectional time. Have a good week. God bless. See you next week.